over to our apartment and said,
I'm watching scary stories right now, so.
"You got a cigarette, Rob Lowe?" We laughed at the way he said it. My dad handed him a cigarette. After about half an hour of them chilling outside, talking about what's going on in their lives and their families' lives, Harold asked the creepiest thing. "Hey, Robert," he said, "I was wondering, you think your daughter could hang out with me in my apartment sometime?" Even this bothered me. Harold must have been in his 40s, and my sister was 13 at the time. The atmosphere outside changed. My father stood up, grabbed Harold and shoved him, yelling, "No, get out of here. What's wrong with you?" Harold walked away laughing, still puffing on his cigarette, and he glared at me in the window. A couple of years roll by. My sister is walking over to the nearby Walgreens, which is several blocks away. Harold yelled at her, saying, "Hey, honey, looking pretty good today. Your dad said you could spend the night if you like. I got a little bit of booze too. That can be our little secret." Our neighbor Sino, who was a pretty cool guy, helped us whenever he could, and at the time he was outside drinking a beer. When he saw Harold following and harassing my sister, he dropped his beer and ran over to Harold and told him, "What is your problem? Do you not know she's 15?
No, these are scary stories.
Just stay away from her, you weirdo." I walked outside in time to catch the ending of that situation,
Listen.
only to see Harold's face again. He was staring at my sister's body. Now, my sister was one of those girls who didn't develop until she was 17 or 18. She looked several years younger than her age, so this disturbed me even more. The way he looked her up and down like a hungry wolf, and he smiled like he knew he was going to win one day. It chilled me to the bone. On that following Saturday night, around 12 o'clock, the scariest thing happened, and luckily my sister was at a friend's house, and my stepmom was at work. Suddenly, some man was banging on the back window, a window to the room I was sleeping in. It was like a banging and scraping sound, like he was trying to break through the thin steel window cover on the outside of the window. About 15 minutes pass, and he's back at the window trying to pry it open, when he screams at me and says, "Where is my wife?" I'm laying down under my blanket, staying still as much as I could, and my dad screams back at the man, trying to scare him off by saying, "Harold, get out of here. I've called the police." But he still didn't run off. He still kept trying to break through. I told my dad to call the police, but he responded with a strong, "Just stay quiet, Zach. I know how to handle this." Several minutes pass, and I hear the first rip through the steel window cover, keeping him out. He's getting through, bit by bit. I started crying. Moments later, my dog Sheba comes running and stands in front of me, facing the window as she growls, ready to attack the man as he comes in. The noises at the window stop, and then suddenly, there's a loud crack, and we realize that he's now breaking in through the front door, and he's screaming again. "Where's my wife? If you don't give me my wife, they won't find a single piece of you left." My dad finally gets on the phone, begin why he was doing what he did. My dad was questioned as well, and the police said, "Do you have his wife?" My dad responded in an angry voice, "Are you stupid? He's talking about my 15-year-old daughter. He thinks she belongs to him. He's psychotic." A few more minutes passed by. They ended up finding a crowbar, as well as some sharper tools thrown into the grass. The next day he was charged, and a few more weeks after court, we find out he ended up in a mental asylum. He apparently had a disability, and he stopped taking his medicine. They ended up letting him out only a few months later. One day my dad was driving home from work, and he happened to pass him this glare and expression of pure hatred. Number 3. Don't trust the cute neighbor. Submitted by Cute Panda. This happened about 2 months ago. I'm 21 years old, and I had just asked my mom if I could move out into an apartment. She, of course, went ahead and made sure the apartment was safe, which it was, so she agreed and let me move in. She helped me with my moving, but my father couldn't help us because he had to have surgery, and he wasn't able to lift anything heavy at the time. Thankfully, my mom and I were plenty strong enough. I met with the landlord, and he gave me the key. Then he told me to keep my eye out for creepy people. My mom even bought me mace after she heard that, which is kind of like pepper spray but more painful. The landlord told me I should meet up with some of the people who lived in the apartments, saying that most of them were very friendly people. It was my first place on my own, so I didn't have much to move in with, so the moving part was fast and easy. When I was finally alone in my apartment, I decided to take a shower. Then I would meet up with about 3 or 4 of my neighbors, who I ended up talking to during the move. So I hopped into the shower, made it a quick one, and I was dressed and ready to meet my neighbors when I suddenly heard a knock at my door. In black, who was tall and probably in his 30s. I noticed he was wet, but not from taking a shower, but from swimming in a pool of some sort. I could even smell the chlorine on him. He said hi to me, said he was happy to see a young girl moving in around here. I smiled and said that I felt bad for having someone have to live near me, and we both laughed. We began to talk to each other, just talking about our interests and life. Eventually, I asked him if he wanted to come in, which he accepted the offer. I asked him if he wanted some coffee, which, like most adults would say, he did. Now, I wasn't a coffee drinker. I preferred tea. So I made him a cup of coffee and me a cup of tea. We had some random conversations, and then he said that he needed to leave, that he was getting tired of smelling the chlorine on himself. I said goodbye. Then he said in a sweeter than normal voice, "You know, it's nice to have a beautiful, sweet girl living in these apartments, not some old, gross creep." I blushed, of course, being the shy girl that I am. Then he left. Later on, I heard a buzz from my phone that night, which startled me. I checked my...
Today's video is once again sponsored by Root Car Insurance. They're a car insurance company doing it way better.
Yeah, they're awesome. Their big thing is their app. You download their app, and then it tracks your driving style over the next couple...
phone to see that I had a follower on Facebook. I accepted it, seeing as it was the guy I'd just met. It told me his name, which I never caught while we were talking. And I also realized that I didn't remember telling him my Facebook account, or my own name for that matter. For a second there, I was weirded out. Then I simply shrugged it off, thinking I may have just forgotten in the midst of our conversation. It was pretty late by then, so I got dressed into my PJs, which were really short shorts, as well as a crop top. Then I put them in a basket and carried that down to the washer and dryers area. It was there that I noticed, let's call the guy Aaron. Aaron with shorts on and no shirt. I blushed when I saw him, and I was kinda glad to know that he was that muscular and in shape. To know that I had a friend in him, and that if I had a problem, he could help me out. I washed my clothes and noticed he was looking at me. I waved at him to say hi, and he seemed to blush back. He told me I could go back to my room, and that he wouldn't mind bringing me my clothes to me when they were ready. I happily accepted his offer and went back to my place. Several minutes later, I heard him knocking. I yelled it was open, and Aaron opened the door, and he walked inside. He handed me my clothes and told me that I shouldn't keep the door unlocked like that, and asked me, what if it wasn't me? I replied with, I would scream as loud as possible and asked him what he would do. He said he'd run as fast as possible to help me. We talked for a while, and he went back to his place. Then I went to bed. But something woke me up in the middle of the night. There was a moving sound in my room. It sounded like there was someone in my room with me. As my eyes widened, and I slowly woke out of my sleep, I reached for my bedside lamp to see what was going on. I clicked it on, and the first thing I saw was my laundry scattered about the floor. They were all over the place as if they'd exploded. Then I saw a man standing there. To my horror, I wasn't alone after all. Someone had broken in. I screamed, and the man looked toward me. I couldn't see anything more than his eyes, because he had a pair of my undies up against his mouth and nose, taking a disgustingly big breath in. What was wrong with this guy? He lowered the article of clothing, and I could see that this was Aaron, the guy I had just met and foolishly trusted in a single day. He smiled down at me, still holding on to my garment. Then he began to approach me, and he said, I know you want me. It's so obvious. Why else do you think I'm here? What? I whimpered. I barely know you. I just met you. So, what does that matter? I saw the way you looked at me. He basically snapped back at me. He pinned me down to my bed, and I screamed again, tears flooding out of my eyes. I felt stupid. Why did I let him get so close? Why did I flirt and trust someone I barely knew? Suddenly, there were bright lights pointing at us, and a voice with authority and bass yelled, Let go of her. Get down on the ground, now. It wasn't for some random stranger that lived at that apartment complex who had called the police when they saw someone breaking into my apartment in the middle of the night. It chills me to think about what might have happened instead. Don't trust anyone you don't know or have just met. You never know what they may be capable of. And number 4, a creepy babysitting story, submitted by Laney Trader 2002. This happened when my stepmother and her baby had moved in with us. It was a bit over a year ago. I was babysitting both of my younger brothers while my parents were out for dinner. Back then, we lived in this one-bedroom apartment in southwest Detroit. So it was small and simple. It was a bit cramped, but we made it work somehow. Anyway, I was feeding the baby, Joseph, while my other brother was playing his video games. His name was Michael. He was playing online with some friends, so he wasn't bothering me much. Joseph was just watching Super Y on Netflix. I was sitting on the couch, texting my best friend Bree. Now, there's some disturbing backstory you need to know. Before we moved here, and partially the reason why we had moved, was because of my ex-boyfriend. You see, his sister had passed away at the time, and just before that happened, I left him. It was such an emotional and traumatic time in his life, he ended up taking his own life. Ever since then, I hadn't really felt the same anymore. What I partly mean is, yeah, I was kind of depressed about it, and a little shaken up. But another thing is, I never felt alone anymore. Like, whenever I was in my room, home alone, whenever I walked down the street by myself, I felt that there was this presence with me, something breathing down my neck. After a while of this, I thought it was shock, so I just got used to the feeling. But that wasn't the only thing. I began to hear footsteps in the halls, on the street behind me. Overall, our own apartment, I began to give off this feeling. It was colder than it should have been. My parents and siblings never seemed to notice. The night before this event, I could have sworn I'd seen a tall male
Questing is really fun.
Collect, explore, go on adventures.
It's mind-blowing how...
shaped shadow running at me from down the hall, but it stopped right in front of me. Maybe it was a dream. My stepmother said it was just me hallucinating, but by God, it was so vivid and terrifying. Anyway, back to the story. I set Joseph beside me as he was eating some Cheetos Puffs. Our door was locked and the bathroom door was wide open. So were the windows. It was warm outside, so I was letting the breeze in. Joseph was looking at something in the room, and he was being completely silent all of a sudden. Usually he'd babble and shove his face full of food, but he had stopped eating and just sat there staring in silence. I looked at him, and I noticed the way he was staring into the corner. I followed his eyes. I didn't see anything and just shut off, still thinking of how weird it was. I turned around, thinking nothing more of it, but I was startled when I heard a small tap on the window nearby. It spooked me pretty good. Before I could go and investigate, I heard rapid running footsteps from the kitchen to the living room as a breeze rushed by, as if someone had just ran past me. Chills went up my spine. Then, in the matter of a quick second, all the windows in the entire apartment slammed shut. They shut so hard I was surprised that they didn't shatter and break. The bathroom door slammed shut as well. The three of us remained where we were, shocked. Michael had thrown his headphones and controller before running towards me. Joseph began to cry and scream. Honestly, I couldn't blame him. I could barely maintain my composure, trying to stay cool for them, even though I was scared more than I'd ever been. I grabbed the baby from his seat, and Michael followed. We ran behind the couch and ducked down. I tried to calm the kids down, but the fact that I was beginning to cry as well didn't help. The whole floor had shifted, and I was just about to call 911. I had to stay on the line, explain everything, and try to calm my siblings down. It was a balancing act that I could barely perform. They said the cops would be on their way, and we waited there for what felt like ages. All the while, something or someone was in the kitchen, scrambling about the silverware, and for a moment, it sounded like they were playing with the knives. Then they began to land at my feet, as whatever it was throwing them at me. Blades were inches from my skin and toes, inches from these helpless, crying children. And that's when the police burst in, and as soon as they did, everything went silent. The strange activity stopped, and the air began to get warmer. They took us to our grandparents' house, and they investigated the apartment. But later on, they found nothing. And to this day, I still can't explain what happened. Michael doesn't remember it after all these years, and neither does Joseph. He doesn't seem too fazed about it. After we were able to go back home, I still felt the breathing on my neck and the eerie presence around me. I still see those shadowy figures sometimes at night. My new therapist says that it's just part of my anxiety, but I disagree. I think it's the spirit of someone whose heart I broke in a time they needed me most, and I've never been more full of regret and guilt. I remember my old apartment. You could always smell the neighbors cooking from the kitchen, always hear their conversations in the living room, and always smell their creations in the bathroom. I hated it, but at least it wasn't haunted. Well, as far as I knew. I was apparently lucky. As you can see, I could have been stalked by crazy people or haunted by evil spirits. Could you imagine paying rent just to keep living in a place that tormented you? No thanks. Good night. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy.
I recently discovered something startling about myself. It turns out that I'm a race.
This video was Pam and her mother took Jake, a friend who his grandmothers were single. He lived. Everyone's either really happy to calm the family and unwrap their gifts, or they're stressed out shopping for those gifts or visiting with those aforementioned family members. But behind all the positive vibes and fake smiles, horror still makes its home.
And then it goes like, then it goes cheap music.
So, are you ready for true Christmas horror stories? Go ahead. I'll let you unwrap this present. Number 1. My Dead Best Friend. Submitted by Jake. Let me start off by saying that this is my husband's story. I will call him Jake. These are true events taken from him and his mother. The story starts in 1996. At the time, my husband would have been around 5. He lived with his mother and grandmother in a small rural town.
Sorry for the interruption. Alright, back to the stories.
His mother, who worked at the local gas station at the time, was friends with this woman. Let's call her Stacy. My husband's mother is named Pam. Stacy and Jake's mother hit it off instantly. They were the same age, they worked together, and they had everything in common. And they both only had one child. Stacy had a son named Chris. Chris and Jake also became best friends. Their mothers would take them on playdates and sleepovers all the time, because both mothers were single and still living with their parents. Jake and Chris were even chickenpox buddies, as Jake caught it simultaneously from Chris. They attended school together and they even went to Cub Scouts together. When the boys were around 7 years old, Jake and his mother moved from her mother's house into a town about an hour away. So after that, Jake and Chris didn't see very much of each other. In fact, the last time they saw each other was for Jake's 7th birthday. Not long after that birthday, though, is when tragedy struck. Chris and his mother Stacy still lived with their parents. And one day, while Stacy was at work, his grandfather was watching him after school. They were in the garage. His grandfather was fixing up his car. But he ran into the house real quick to see if he could find his wrench, and he left Chris alone in the garage for only what seemed like a minute. When his grandfather came back into the garage, he found Chris under some large metal poles that were in the corner of the garage. I don't know much past this part, only that he must have been playing too close to the pipes, and they fell on top of him. The grandfather called 911, but he was pronounced dead when the ambulance arrived. But that's not where the story ends. Pam decided to take Jake to Chris's visitation to help him process his death. My husband says he was too young to remember much. All he can really remember is the funeral home, the flowers, and the sadness. Not long after the visitation, Pam noticed that Jake had an imaginary friend. A friend who he began to call Chris. His mother didn't think much of it. She asked other parents about it, and they all said it was just children processing death their own way, completely normal. Well, time went on, and his imaginary friend did not go away. They eventually moved back in with Pam's mother because Pam was going through a rough divorce. Things began to calm down and half a year passed. However, the imaginary friend named Chris, he was still there. One day before Christmas, Pam and her mother took Jake to Walmart to look for lights and decorations for the Christmas tree. They made a short stop down the toy aisle, and of course Jake went crazy, like all 7-year-old kids would do when they go down the toy aisle. As they traveled down the Toy Express, Jake noticed a plastic electric guitar that would play songs with the push of a button. He asked. It was on a very high shelf, so Pam and her mother looked around the corners for a Walmart associate. Then they heard Jake say while they were searching around the corner, "It's okay, Chris said he would play it for me." Pam and her mom both rolled their eyes as they walked on to find a sales associate still, when suddenly, the guitar lit up from the high shelf and began to play the long, exaggerated guitar rhythms. Pam and her mother stared at Jake in disbelief, because there was no way in hell that he could have reached it, let alone them. They paused for a moment, and then the guitar fell from the shelf and onto the floor. Jake looked at them grinning. "I told you Chris could do it. He can do anything now." Pam and her mother were extremely terrified. They left the aisle immediately, still in disbelief of what they had just witnessed. To this day, my husband only remembers bits and pieces of this, and he has absolutely no recollection of the incident at the store. Jake's mother recently told me this story. She also told me that she spoke to Chris's mother, Stacy, about 5 years ago, only to learn that Stacy had also been experiencing the same type of events. She said that Chris had never left. Stacy gave birth to a daughter in 2002, and soon enough her young daughter started to experience the same things. She eventually got an imaginary friend. It was a friend she called Chris. I sometimes wonder if that's all possible. See, I'm a big skeptic of ghosts myself, especially the ghosts of children, because I was born and raised Baptist. But my husband believes the story without a doubt, because he remembers his imaginary friend here and there. But he says to me that it wasn't so imaginary for him. Number 2. It started on the night before Christmas. Submitted by Kid. Something happened on the night before Christmas a few years ago. My sister and I were in her room putting up clothes, as we share a closet. While I was busy hanging them up, I heard what sounded like the toilet lid slam shut in the bathroom. And of course it shocked me. It was very loud. So when I finished hanging the shirt I was on, I went to the bathroom to check out the noise, and the toilet lid was down. This was creepy because we were the only ones in the house. So I yelled back down into the hallway, asking my sister if she had left the toilet lid down. She said no, she hadn't used it since I had last. I figured maybe she just forgot, or maybe it was just some sort of gravity or temperature thing. But it's never done that before. I've always believed in the paranormal, so this kind of freaked me out. As I walked back into the hallway towards her room, I glanced over to my doorway, and the light that was on just flicked off, and not a second later we both heard a loud crash come from the kitchen. Quickly and without a word, we together went down to the kitchen to check it out. Nothing was out of place, and there was no one there. So I made a joke about it just being the ghost of a Christmas witch, though we were both pretty creeped out. Tasteless as it was, we went back to her room with my head focused on the floor, and on the way back I saw a shadow move in the doorway. Now, embarrassingly, I let out a bit of a squeal, as it had really surprised me, and my sister looked at me like I was weird. I asked her if she saw that, and she said no. It was all just so bizarre. Even still, me just asking her if she saw something seemed to creep her out even more. So we ran to her room and closed the door, and we called our parents on the phone. But they didn't answer. Then we tried my sister's phone, and they actually answered that time. We told them what we heard, and I could tell they were getting worried. So I told them that we could tough it out until they got back. I both wanted to rush them, and I didn't want to be rude. I was scared, and I didn't want us to be alone any longer. Yet they were a county over, and that was 15 miles away. So we waited about 40 minutes for them to get here. Luckily, that was it for the night, yet there were other events all during my Christmas break that were very creepy, and I didn't get any good sleep until Christmas break was over. On multiple nights, I had sat up at night with my light on and the door open, just waiting, and I had this horrible, palpable feeling that something was watching me. On the worst night, my aunt and mom were talking across the hall in my mom's room. I had my back turned to the door and had a sheet covering me. Then all of a sudden, that feeling came again of someone watching me. I started to get scared again, and I heard a footstep in my room. It was unmistakable, coming from my room. Yet I was the only one in there. And only a few moments later, I felt something jump onto the bed with me, and my bed began to shake. And my bed doesn't shake very easily. And just as quickly as it happened, it all stopped. After that Christmas break, nothing big has happened, and I'm pretty glad for that. I don't honestly know what's up with our house and why it only happened during the Christmas break, considering it never happened in the past, and it hasn't happened since. But so long as it's quiet, I'm happy, and I hope it stays quiet. I don't wish this kind of feeling on anyone, that strong sense of helpless fear. Number 3. I can't wait to get out of here. Submitted by French of Fire. I moved to my current apartment less than a year ago. I live in a busy student city in Europe, and I had almost given up on finding a new reasonably priced apartment when I got an offer from one of the housing associations that I had applied to. I went to see the apartment and nearly couldn't believe my luck. It was recently renovated and spacious. The area was a dream, and the rent was way lower than I had expected. I would have gladly accepted a much worse offer in order to not have to live under a bridge, so I was more than happy to accept this one. I got the keys, and I moved in 2 weeks later. The first few weeks went nicely. I was still on Christmas holiday, so I could just enjoy the peace and quiet from my new apartment. I was happy to notice that there was apparently no extra activity in the house. You know what I mean. Having lived my whole younger life in places that were more or less riddled with the paranormal crap I had grown used to, I had never enjoyed it. Unfortunately, I was very wrong. I'm no writer, but I'll try to list some of the most significant things that happened that have led me to considering searching for a new place to live. It turned out to be a very creepy Christmas holiday. One day I was walking to the small hall of my home to take something from the wardrobe. The moment I stepped in, I felt a very weird presence right behind me, and in a matter of seconds, this wild and irrational sense of horror and threat just surrounded me. It froze my nerves to the point I had a hard time walking back to the kitchen. This messed with my mind pretty bad. It just literally came from nowhere. I was shaking and tearing up, and actually had to call my mother to get over it. Now, I'm not a sensitive person in the least, and I have no history of anxiety or panic disorders or any other mental problems. And I wasn't even thinking about anything fear-inducing, so this was very out of the ordinary. The same pattern repeated itself a few times after that, too. One time I came home and the whole hallway smelled like aftershave and leather. The smell was so strong that it irritated my nose. As soon as I got past the hallway, it just disappeared. I don't know where that smell came from. All the windows were closed. Another time, my bathroom suddenly started smelling like expensive perfume in the middle of the day. I know old smells can stay for a long time, but this wasn't it. I mean, it came 1 second as strong as a scent can, only to completely disappear a few minutes later. After the first incident, the atmosphere of the house changed pretty clearly. Those intense feelings of a presence somewhere behind me and things looking at me got worse and worse. It was similar to the feeling you get when you catch someone looking at you, except I was alone in my house. It felt like I had a terrible sixth sense. The next weird thing happened while I was lying on my bed, playing on my phone. It was noon and I was alone. The way my house is set up is my bed is an alcove and only a long wall separates it from the hallway. So clear as day, I heard someone walking through my hall. And if that wasn't bad enough, I heard them clearly press the bathroom door closed less than 5 feet away from me. That door is broken, and it has to be pressed with force or it doesn't click shut. But something did. Something I couldn't see clicked it shut itself. Maybe 10 seconds later, I heard paper bags in my kitchen start to rustle around, like someone was crumpling them in their hand. Needless to say, I was petrified. After that, I would occasionally be reading a book on my bed, or something like that, when I would start to hear footsteps in the hallway. They sounded more like animals than people, and I could hear the clicking of nails. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was the house settling, that I shouldn't be such a scaredy cat. Once, the footsteps sounded like they were moving in a circle in my hallway, and I had the guts to go check it out. The moment I peeked my head out of the doorway, there was nothing there, and the footsteps stopped, and only a moment later, they started coming right at me and stopped maybe 1 foot away. I said nope, shut my door, locked it, and went back to my book, trying to forget about it. Just writing about that experience made my hair stand on end. I don't know what I would have done had I actually seen something in the hallway. A few nights after that one, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, and I was full alert. I sat up in my bed, disturbed.